I stood at the altar in my mother's wedding dress for 40 minutes before I understood that he was not coming. 200 guests watched me understand it. The clock in the tower had chimed twice. I felt both chimes in my ribs, low and resonant, the way you feel a door slam in a house you thought was empty. The flowers were white roses. My mother had chosen them, had pressed her fingers against each bloom the morning before and said, "Perfect." And they were still perfect. And Edmund was still not here. And the two facts sat beside each other in my chest, like stones of unequal weight. The guests had stopped pretending to whisper. I could hear them now. Not words. I did not need words. I knew the sound of a room full of people deciding how they would describe this to the people who were not here. I knew the specific pitch of pity sharpening itself into a story. I had heard it before, in smaller rooms about smaller disasters. Never about me. Never in front of 200 witnesses who would dine on this for a decade. My hands were folded in front of me. They were steady. They would remain steady if it was the last thing I did in this church. The vicar approached. He was a kind man with a weak chin and the expression of someone who had rehearsed several versions of this conversation and found none of them adequate. He could not meet my eyes. He said very quietly, "Perhaps we might wait a few more minutes, my lady." "We will not." My voice did not break. I was proud of that. In the cold, practical way you are proud of a thing that costs you everything and shows nothing. I turned to face the guests. 200 faces. I looked at them the way my father had taught me to look at a ledger when the numbers were bad. Directly, without flinching, because the numbers did not get better if you looked away. I would not be pitied by people I could see clearly. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something composed, something that sounded like dignity and cost me every wall I had ever built, when I heard the footsteps. From the back, the last pew. The sound was wrong. Not boots on stone, not the ordinary percussion of a man walking into a church. It was the near absence of sound. The way air moves when something very old passes through it. The way a room changes temperature before you understand why. Every head turned. Every conversation died. The candle flames along the aisle leaned sideways, all of them simultaneously in the same direction, toward the figure now standing in the nave, as though the fire itself recognized something and turned to look. He was dressed in black, not the fashionable black of mourning or the careful black of a man who had considered his appearance, the absolute black of something that had stopped requiring the room's approval several centuries ago. He did not hurry. He walked the length of the aisle with the unhurried certainty of a thing that has been waiting for a specific moment for considerably longer than 40 minutes and sees no reason to rush now that it has finally arrived. He passed the second pew, the fifth, the 10th. 200 pairs of eyes tracked him. No one spoke. No one breathed. The shadows along the walls moved with him in ways that shadows do not ordinarily move, gathering at his edges like something attendant, something patient. Everyone in this county knew the Vampire King did not attend weddings. He attended the backs of rooms. He had done so for as long as anyone's grandmother could remember, present at every significant occasion, always at the periphery, always watching, never participating. A fixture of the county's social architecture, the way a gargoyle is a fixture of a cathedral, observed, never approached. He stopped at the altar. He stood where Edmund should have stood. He looked at me. His eyes were amber, not warm, not yet. Ancient. The eyes of something that has watched 5 centuries of human ceremony from the back of rooms and has never once been moved to walk to the front, until now. The cold that only a vampire carries came off him in a slow, steady wave. Not unpleasant, not threatening, simply present. The way winter is present. The way stone is present. The way things that have outlasted everything else are present. He extended his hand. Palm up, open. The gesture of a man offering a choice to a woman who has just had all her choices removed. He did not speak. The church was silent. The vicar's mouth was open. My mother, in the third pew, had pressed both hands to her face, and at the side entrance, in a dark coat, standing very still with the expression of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a particular thing to happen and is experiencing the specific, controlled satisfaction of watching it happen at last, stood a woman I did not know yet. I would know her tomorrow. I would know her name was Mrs. Harrow, and that she had kept the Vane estate for 40 years, and that she had watched her employer stand at the back of rooms for decades without understanding why until this morning, when she understood completely. I looked at his open hand. I looked at his amber eyes. I looked at 200 faces waiting to see what I did with the wreckage of this morning. My pride said, "You do not know this man." My pride said, "This is not rescue. This is spectacle, and you have had enough spectacle." My pride said a great many things, in the composed and careful voice I had spent 25 years cultivating, and I heard all of them, and I placed my hand in his anyway. His fingers closed around mine, cold, steady, certain as a contract signed in ink that does not fade. The vicar made a sound. I did not hear it. The room made a sound. 200 people exhaling, shifting, the low roar of a story changing shape in real time. I did not hear that either. I heard only the silence between his hand and mine, which was not silence at all, but the specific, irreversible sound of a door opening that has no intention of being closed. By the end of the month, I would learn why the Vampire King had been sitting in the back of that church. Why he had watched. Why he had waited. The answer would cost me every wall I had ever built. I did not know that yet. I only knew his hand was cold and steady, and that I had not let go. The vicar married us in 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock in the tower the entire time, the same clock that had chimed twice into my ribs while I waited for Edmund, now marking something else entirely, something I did not have a name for yet. The vicar's voice shook on the vows. Mine did not. Soren's did not. His voice was low and even and unhurried, the way everything about him was unhurried, and when he said, "I will," the candle flames leaned toward him again, all at once as though the fire was agreeing. 200 people watched us walk back down the aisle. Not one of them spoke. I kept my hand in his because releasing it in front of 200 witnesses would have been its own kind of spectacle, and I had decided, somewhere between the altar and the door, that I was done providing spectacle for free. The Vane estate was 3 miles from the church. I had passed its gates my entire life without looking at them directly, the way you do not look directly at things that unsettle you without reason. Iron gates, old stone, the particular silence of a property that has been kept for centuries by someone who does not require noise to feel occupied. The carriage ride was quiet. Soren sat across from me. The cold came off him in that slow, steady wave, not aggressive, simply present, and I sat with my spine straight and my hands folded and watched the dark trees pass the window and did not ask a single question, because asking questions would have meant admitting I had them. He did not fill the silence. I was used to men who filled silences with themselves. Edmund had been magnificent at it. The easy laugh, the practiced charm, the conversational sleight of hand that made you feel attended to without ever actually being seen. Soren simply sat in the dark of the carriage and watched me with those amber eyes and said nothing. And the nothing was somehow more present than anything Edmund had ever said. Mrs. Harrow was waiting at the door. She was a compact woman, 40 years of service written into the set of her shoulders and the particular economy of her movements. Nothing wasted, nothing performed. She looked at me the way a woman looks at a thing she has been expecting for a long time and is quietly relieved to finally see arrive. "My lady," she said, "your rooms are prepared." "Thank you." I paused. "I did not catch your name." "Harrow. I run the house." She said it without apology or elaboration, which I respected immediately. "You'll want a bath and something hot, in that order." I did not argue. I was too tired to argue, and she was already moving. I woke in a room that was too large and too cold and smelled of old stone and someone else's century. The ceiling was high and dark. The walls were paneled in wood that had been old when my grandmother was born. The fire had burned down to embers in the night, and the cold had crept back in the way cold does in old houses. Patient, thorough, personal. I lay still for a moment and took inventory of myself the way my mother had taught me to take inventory of a room. What is present? What is missing? What is out of place? Present. Myself. A bed too large for one person. A window showing gray morning light. The faint smell of wood smoke and something older underneath it. Missing. Everything familiar. Out of place, the tonneau. The cup on the bedside table. I had not heard anyone enter. The cup was there when I opened my eyes. Ceramic, plain, steam rising from it in a thin, steady thread. I sat up. I reached for it without thinking. The way you reach for things that smell like relief, and the smell hit me before the cup reached my lips. Ginger. I set it down. I had not asked for ginger tea. I had not asked for any tea. I had not told anyone about the nausea, the low, persistent nausea that had been living behind my sternum for 3 weeks, the kind that arrived with stress and stayed like an unwelcome houseguest, the kind I had been managing with careful stillness and the occasional pressed hand to my midsection when I thought no one was watching. The door opened. Mrs. Harrow came in with a small tray, dry toast, a folded cloth, the brisk efficiency of a woman who has managed illness and grief and worse without being asked. "I didn't request this," I said. "No," she agreed. She set the tray down. She did not look at me with pity. She looked at me with the flat, practical attention of someone cataloging a situation. "Ginger settles it. You'll find it helps more than the stillness does." I went very still. "I don't know what you mean." "The nausea." She straightened. "You pressed your hand to your stomach twice during the ceremony. Once when the vicar delayed, once when the clock chimed. He noticed. The cold in the room felt different suddenly, more specific." "You are observant," I said. "He is observant," she corrected, without heat, without emphasis, as though this were simply a fact about the weather. "I merely deliver the tea." She left. The door closed. I looked at the cup. The steam was still rising. The temperature was exactly right. Not scalding, not cooling. The precise warmth of something prepared by someone who understood that a woman who had been managing herself carefully for 3 weeks deserved at least one thing that did not require management. I drank it. I hated that I drank it. I drank all of it. And then I sat with the empty cup in my hands and looked at the gray morning through the window and thought about a man who had watched me press my hand to my stomach in a church full of 200 people and had said nothing, done nothing, simply filed the information away and acted on it quietly, without announcement, without requiring my gratitude. Edmund had never once noticed when I was unwell. I set the cup down. I did not examine the comparison. I got dressed. The county knew by the end of the week. Of course it did. 200 witnesses, 11 minutes. The vampire king and the abandoned bride. The story was too good to stay quiet, and it did not stay quiet. It moved through drawing rooms and dinner tables and morning calls with the velocity of something people had been waiting to tell. And by the time it reached its third retelling, it had already begun to calcify into legend. I heard 3 versions of it before I stopped listening. In one, I had fainted. In another, I had wept. In the version I liked least, I had been rescued. The word landing soft and condescending, as though I were a parcel left in the rain rather than a woman who had made a calculated decision with her eyes open. I moved through the estate with my composure intact. I performed the role of a wife who had made a strategic decision and was satisfied with it, because that was, in fact, what I had done, and I saw no reason to perform anything else. Soren did not test the performance. He gave me space, physical, emotional, architectural, with the same unhurried certainty he gave everything. My chambers were in the west wing. His were in the east. We met at meals, and at meals he asked me questions. Not social questions. Not the careful, surface-level inquiries of a man managing a new wife. He asked about the land grant, the specific legal language of it, the contested boundaries, the decade of Marchetti challenges and my family's responses, the political alliance with Edmund's brother that had been the grant's primary protection and was now, with Edmund fled to the continent, considerably less reliable. He listened the way I was learning to associate with him. The full, patient focus of something that has centuries to spend and chooses to spend them on your words. No interruptions. No redirections. When I finished speaking, he would sit for a moment in silence, and then he would ask the next question. And the next question was always the one I had not thought to ask myself. "The Marchetti claim," he said one evening, over a dinner neither of us was eating. "It was filed 3 times in 10 years, each time dismissed. What changed before the 4th? I looked at him. "Nothing changed," I said slowly. "That's what I couldn't understand. The legal ground was identical, and then Edmund—" I stopped. "And then Edmund's engagement to you was announced," Soren said, "and the 4th filing was withdrawn." The candle between us burned very still. "They didn't need the filing," I said. "They needed the marriage to fail." He said nothing. He did not need to. Mrs. Harrow appeared at the door with ginger tea. She set it beside my plate without comment. She had stopped pretending it was her idea. I had stopped asking her to stop. We had arrived at a mutual understanding that neither of us felt the need to name. 3 weeks in, I found his coat on the chair. He had been in my sitting room that afternoon, reviewing documents with me, the land grant papers spread across the desk, our shoulders not quite touching as we leaned over the same page. He had a way of occupying space that was different from other men. He did not expand into a room. He simply became part of it. the way old furniture becomes part of a room. Present, weight-bearing, quietly necessary. He left without the coat. I noticed it when I turned from the desk. Black wool, heavy, draped over the back of the chair, with the careless precision of something set down by someone who does not think about their possessions because their possessions have never been at risk. I should have sent it to the East Wing. I should have rung for Mrs. Harrow and handed it off without ceremony. I picked it up. The cold hit me immediately. Not the cold of a room. Not the cold of fabric left near a window. The cold that lived in him. The specific, ancient temperature of something that had not been warm in 5 centuries. Preserved in the wool the way cold is preserved in stone, in iron, in things that do not change. I stood with it in my hands and felt the cold move up through my fingers, and I thought, with the precise, unwilling clarity that arrives when you are trying very hard not to think something. This is what he is. This is the actual temperature of the thing you placed your hand in. I set the coat on the back of the chair. I did not return it. I went to bed. In the morning, the coat was gone. Neither of us mentioned it at breakfast. Mrs. Harrow brought ginger tea and said nothing, and Mrs. Harrow's silence was louder than most people's commentary, and I drank the tea and looked at the window and did not think about the coat. That evening, I went to my sitting room and found the chair. The coat was gone. In its place, a blanket. New, I could tell by the smell, the particular clean smell of wool that has not yet absorbed a house's history. Thick, the color of dark heather. I reached out and touched it before I thought to stop myself, and the warmth came up through my fingers like an answer to a question I had not asked aloud. He had replaced his cold coat with something warm. He had noticed me hold it. He had understood why I held it. Not the coat, but the cold in it. The reality of what he was. The moment of reckoning that a woman takes alone in a sitting room when no one is watching. He had understood, and he had not addressed it, and he had not given me himself. He had given me the warmth instead. I pressed my face into the blanket. 3 seconds. Exactly 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than I should have allowed, and 1 second shorter than I wanted. And then I straightened and folded it with the precise, careful movements I used when I was managing myself, and I placed it at the foot of my bed. I would not examine what I had just done. I would not. I sat on the edge of the bed, in the too large, too cold room that was beginning, against my will, against every wall I had ever built, to smell faintly like somewhere I lived. And somewhere in the East Wing, I was almost certain, something very old and very patient was sitting in the dark. Waiting, not for me to come to him, for me to understand why I wanted to. The morning came in gray and certain, the way mornings do when something has already been decided in the dark. I was still in the East Wing when the light found the window. I did not remember deciding to stay. I remembered kneeling. I remembered the cold steadying under my palm. I remembered the specific, incremental moment when his breathing changed. When the chemical wrongness burned off and the real cold returned, his cold, the 5-century cold that I had learned to distinguish from every other kind of cold in the world, and the learning of it had happened so quietly that I had not noticed until it was already complete. At some point I had moved from the floor to the chair beside him. At some point the candle had gone out. I sat in the dark of his room in the gray, early light, with my hands folded in my lap, and I did not examine what I had done or why I had done it. I simply sat with the fact of it, the way you sit with a thing that has already happened and cannot be unhappened. The composure was still gone. I did not reach for it. There was no one to perform anything for, and I was very tired of performing, and the room was cold in the way that was his, and I was, against every wall I had ever built, not uncomfortable. He woke at first light. His eyes opened, amber, clear, the glassiness entirely gone. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us spoke. The gray light moved across the floor between us. The cold of the room settled. Outside, somewhere on the grounds, a bird made a single sound and then was quiet. "You stayed," he said. "I was tired," I said. "The West Wing is far." His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. The expression of a man who has been alive for 5 centuries and has learned to recognize the precise moment when a woman is lying about something that does not require a lie, and has decided that the lie is its own kind of truth. "Of course," he said. I stood. I smoothed my skirts. I walked to the door with the precise, unhurried movements of a woman who has not just spent the night in a chair beside a vampire because she could not make herself leave. "Soren." I stopped. I did not turn. "Thank you," he said, "for the ginger tea." My hand was on the doorframe. 3 seconds. Exactly 3 seconds, which was 2 seconds longer than I should have allowed and 1 second shorter than I wanted. "Mrs. Harrow delivers the tea," I said. "Yes," he said. "She does." I walked out. Mrs. Harrow was in the corridor. Of course she was. She was holding a tray, ginger tea, dry toast. The brisk efficiency of a woman who has managed everything and requires no instruction. She looked at me with the flat, practical attention of someone cataloging a situation and finding it exactly as she had expected. She said nothing. I said nothing. We walked together toward the drawing room, and the silence between us was the specific, companionable silence of 2 women who understand each other completely and have agreed, without discussion, never to discuss it. At the drawing room door, she stopped. "They are here," she said. "Already. I sent word at midnight." She set the tray on the hall table. She straightened. "The magistrate is thorough. He arrived at 7. I looked at her. She looked back at me with the expression of a woman who has been keeping this house for 40 years and has never once waited to be asked. "The glass," I said. "Wrapped, labeled, witnessed." She paused. "I also have the solicitor's correspondence. He left his case in the hall when he arrived yesterday. I read the documents before I returned it." Another pause. "I have a very good memory." I looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Harrow," I said. "My lady, you have been waiting for this." She did not answer immediately. She looked at the drawing room door with the expression of a woman looking at something she has been patient about for a very long time. "He sat at the back of rooms for 40 years, she said. "Every significant occasion in this county. Every wedding, every funeral, every assembly, always at the back, always watching." She smoothed her apron with one precise movement. "I have kept this house for 40 years. I know what it looks like when something is waiting for a reason to stop waiting." She opened the drawing room door. Lady Isolde Marchetti was standing at the window. She had been there, I suspected, since early morning. The posture of a woman who has spent the night recalculating and has arrived at a position she intends to defend. She wore gray again, the deliberate gray, the weapon gray. She turned when I entered, and the composed certainty was still there, still present, but thinner now. The way ice is thinner in March, still holding, but with the specific fragility of something that knows its season is ending. The magistrate stood near the fireplace. He was a broad man with the careful, unhurried manner of someone who has presided over difficult situations for long enough to have stopped being impressed by them. He held a document. He had the expression of a man who has read it twice and found it sufficient. Beside him, two constables, still, patient. Beside the door, Mrs. Harrow, with the glass in its handkerchief and the expression of a woman who has all the time in the world. Isolde looked at me. The calculation moved across her face. Rapid, precise. The specific calculation of a woman assessing whether there is still a version of this morning in which she wins. She looked at the magistrate. She looked at the constables. She looked at the glass in Mrs. Harrow's hands. She looked back at me. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. Her voice was steady. I gave her that. The composure held, even now, even here, the trained, weaponized composure of a woman who has spent a decade being underestimated and has learned to use the underestimation. She looked at the magistrate with the expression of a woman appealing to reason. The wine was a gift, a social gesture. Whatever Mrs. Harrow believes she observed, Lady Marchetti. The magistrate's voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man who has heard many versions of this sentence and has stopped finding them interesting. The substance has been identified. The apothecary was cooperative. The composure cracked, not dramatically, not all at once. The way ice cracks, a single line, spreading from a single point, the structural integrity failing in one direction and then another. Her hands, folded so carefully in front of her, tightened. Her knuckles went white. The gray certainty of her expression fractured at the edges, and underneath it was something I recognized. Not guilt, not remorse, but the specific, furious disbelief of a woman who has planned everything and cannot understand how the plan has failed. "He is a vampire," she said. The word came out sharp and stripped of its social coating. The raw version. The version she had been using in private for years. "He is not. This is not a marriage. It is a transaction." And she was abandoned at the altar. And whatever she believes she chose, said a voice from the doorway. Every head turned. Soren stood in the doorway of the drawing room. He was dressed, composed. The amber eyes were clear and steady and burning with the particular, unhurried certainty of something that has been patient for a very long time and has decided that patience has served its purpose. The cold came off him in that slow, steady wave, not aggressive, not threatening, simply present, the way winter is present, the way stone is present, the way things that have outlasted everything else are present. He looked at Lady Isolde Marchetti. He looked at her the way he had looked at the back of rooms for 40 years, with the full, patient focus of something that sees clearly and has never once been in a hurry. "She chose," he said again, in front of 200 witnesses, with her eyes open, with her hands steady. A pause. "I have watched this county for 5 decades. I have watched every significant occasion from the back of every room. I have watched men take credit for women's decisions and call it protection. I have watched women be described as rescued when they were, in fact, choosing." The amber did not waver. "I will not watch it happen to my wife." The word landed in the room like a stone in still water. Wife, not arrangement, not convenience, not the careful, strategic language we had both been using for 3 weeks to describe something that had stopped being strategic somewhere between the coat and the blanket and the dark of the East Wing. I looked at him. He looked at me. The gray morning light moved between us. I did not look away. Lady Isolde Marchetti left the Vane estate between two constables. She did not go quietly. There was a moment at the door when the composure failed entirely, and what was underneath it came out in a single sharp sentence directed at me, something about convenience and desperation, and the specific cruelty of a woman who has lost and wants the losing to cost something. I heard it. I let it land. I did not answer it. My hands were steady. They had been steady since the altar. They would remain steady. The solicitor followed her out with his leather case and his brass clasp and his months of careful preparation, and the door of the Vane estate closed behind them with the particular resonant sound of something ending. Mrs. Harrow handed the glass to the magistrate. She watched him leave. She turned back to the hall with the expression of a woman who has completed a task she has been working toward for a considerable amount of time and is experiencing the specific, quiet satisfaction of a thing done correctly. She looked at me. She looked at Soren. She picked up the tray from the hall table, the ginger tea, the dry toast, the brisk efficiency of 40 years of service, and she carried it into the drawing room and set it on the table by the window. "Breakfast," she said, to neither of us in particular. She left. The drawing room was quiet. The gray morning had become something warmer, not quite gold, not quite clear, the specific light of a November day that has decided to be generous despite itself. It came through the window and fell across the floor between us and lay there, patient, unhurried. I sat. He sat across from me. The ginger tea steamed between us. Neither of us reached for it immediately. The silence was the kind we had built over 3 weeks of documents and questions and long evenings in the study. Not empty, not uncomfortable, but weighted with the specific gravity of two people who have been circling something and have arrived, simultaneously, at the edge of it. "The petition," I said. "Withdrawn," he said. "The legal basis required the marriage to be invalid. It is not invalid." I looked at the tea. "You heard everything she said." I heard everything she said. "About the convenience, the transaction." He was quiet for a moment. The amber eyes were steady. "Is that what you believe it is?" I looked at him. I thought about the ginger tea. I thought about the coat and the blanket, and the questions that were always the questions I had not thought to ask myself. I thought about kneeling on the floor of the east wing with my hand on his face while the composure came apart in the dark, and the naming of the thing I had refused to name, and the fact that the naming had not surprised me, and the fact that the not surprising was the most frightening thing of all. "No," I said. The word was very small. It cost me every wall I had ever built. He reached across the table, palm up, open, the same gesture as the altar, the same offer, the same patience, the same unhurried certainty of something that has been waiting for a specific moment and sees no reason to rush now that it has finally arrived. I looked at his open hand. I placed mine in it. His fingers closed around mine. Cold, steady. Certain as a contract signed in ink that does not fade. Outside the window, the November light moved across the grounds of the Vane estate, across the old iron gates, the old stone walls, the particular silence of a property that has been kept for centuries by someone who does not require noise to feel occupied. The roses in the garden were bare now, the white blooms long gone, but the canes were still there, still rooted, still holding their shape against the cold. They would bloom again in spring. They always did. The county talked about it for a decade. Of course it did. The abandoned bride, the vampire king, the poisoned wine, the magistrate at 7 in the morning. The story was too good to stay quiet, and it did not stay quiet. It moved through drawing rooms and dinner tables and morning calls with the velocity of something people had been waiting to tell. And by the time it reached its 10th retelling, it had calcified into legend. In the version I liked best, I had been magnificent. In the version closest to the truth, I had simply been honest. Once in a drawing room, with my hands folded and my composure gone, and a man across the table who had been watching this county from the back of rooms for 40 years and had finally, for the first time, sat at the front. Mrs. Harrow continued to deliver the ginger tea. She had stopped pretending it was her idea. I had stopped asking her to stop. We had arrived at a mutual understanding that neither of us felt the need to name, which was, I had come to understand, the highest form of respect available in a house this old. The land grant was secured. The Marchetti claim was dismissed, finally, permanently, with the specific legal finality of a thing that has been attempted 4 times and will not be attempted a 5th. My family's name remained on the deed. The contested boundaries were resolved. The political alliance that Edmund's flight had endangered was replaced by something considerably more durable, which was the specific, ancient authority of a man who has been present in this county for 5 centuries and has never once needed anyone's approval to remain. I moved my things from the West Wing, not all at once, gradually. The way you move toward something that has stopped requiring you to pretend you are not moving toward it. A book first, then the blanket, the dark heather blanket, warm and new, which had been at the foot of my bed for 3 weeks and was coming with me regardless. Then the rest. Mrs. Harrow supervised the moving with the expression of a woman who has been expecting this since approximately the 2nd morning and is experiencing the specific, controlled satisfaction of watching something arrive exactly on schedule. She said nothing. I said nothing. The East Wing was cold, his cold, the real kind, the 5th-century kind that I had learned to distinguish from every other cold in the world, and the learning of it had happened so quietly that I had not noticed until it was already complete, and the completion of it was, I had decided, not something I intended to examine further. It was simply true. The way the cold was true. The way the old stone was true. The way the door that had opened in that church, the door that had no intention of being closed, was true. I had placed my hand in his. I had not let go. The cruelest thing a room full of people can do is watch you be humiliated and say nothing. But the most dangerous thing in the world is a kindness you did not ask for, because you cannot build a wall against something that has already found the door. If this story found you at the right moment, subscribe. There are more rooms to walk into, more silences to name, more hands extended palm up in the dark. Tell me in the comments, which moment broke the wall for you?